So I know somebody right now that's unfortunately really struggling financially. Let me paint the picture for you. So the person is in their late 50s. They've unfortunately recently lost their job. They didn't have a lot of savings, no emergency fund, and more than anything like that, they had no retirement savings. They're about ready to be moved out onto the street, unfortunately. And as I was thinking of that, I thought of some of the top retirement regrets because at least if the person had put some money aside for retirement, you know, they could go find another job, hopefully, pull themselves up, and still have something besides just Social Security. So if you don't know, I'm Rich, and I'm here just sharing my journey, sharing some of the things I did well, some of the things I wish I had done differently, really more as an educational guide to help you. Maybe you're just starting out, or maybe you're like myself in your early 50s. So, why don't we get into the top retirement regrets? So, I pulled this list off of ChatGPT, and we're going to go through each one. And I thought, again, I'll give you my thoughts. Some I'll dive into maybe some examples of the differences and impact of doing things, and as well give you my thoughts on it. So the first one is starting too late. This is the number one thing that most people always say is their biggest regret, right? And they don't realize compounding, right? Schools don't teach that to young people. And I think most of the time people think, when they get that first time job, they're making a certain salary and they go, I'll just put it off to down the road. I'll start later, and not realizing the impact that does it. So, again, my thoughts, I got very, very lucky. I started my professional career around 21 or 22, and immediately I started saving something for retirement. So, in that side of it, I don't feel like I started too late. I probably have some other regrets, but we'll go into that later. And my thoughts around this is, when I got my small salary at the time and I put 6% aside, if I had waited 3 years, 5 years, would I have taken 3%? Right? Or 4% or 5%. Starting early, at least you're getting something in there. I don't even think you have to do 6% like I did. Maybe you're doing 5%. I would recommend that you do 10%, right? But if you didn't do, if you didn't start, I don't know why you ever think you will, right? Because if you can't afford it on a certain salary, in a couple of years later when you're making a little bit more, what's you to think that you're going to actually save more money then just because you're making more money? If you can't start on a smaller salary, I don't think you're going to actually start saving at a larger salary. And really, what happens when you lose 10 years in the market? It's a big difference in your savings. And let's go through an example of that, right? So again, I'm using my example in a way of my salary. So I started off my career at 27.5, at 22. I'm going to say I got a 3% increase every single year and an 8% return. I like this as a baseline. Maybe you want to do 10%. Again, I like 8%. I think it's not too aggressive, but it's not too conservative at the same time. And saving 6%, starting with this salary, this is what I would have at the end of my retirement. A little over $800,000. Great income that you can then draw from in addition to Social Security. Again, if you had delayed, right, not starting sooner, let's say you were going to start at 32, right? Still at the 6%, because I didn't do 6% at 22, maybe I want to do 6% when I'm 32. Now again, your salary might be a little bit higher. I'm going to put this up at $35,000. But you can see, missing 10 years in the market, the amount of income that you'd be able to save is half. Okay, from 10 years, from 43 years to 33 years, your savings goes down in half for missing 10 years. So start early. That's all I'm going to say. And again, that is the biggest regret that most people have? Not saving consistently. So, you know, what I would say is don't stop. Okay. At least do certain amounts, right? When you get a raise, increase it 1%, right? There's lots of different things. But again, my perspective is, and I'm not going to pretend that I started at 6% and I'm at 6% today. I think your savings is going to go up, and now in my 50s, my percentage is higher probably now or close to now than it ever has been. So, and I put down in there probably what I think I was doing over all these years. I think I was at 6, then I went up to 10, I was up to 12. Pretty sure when I was at my previous company, life happened. My wife went back to school. I probably went all the way down to 6%. I would hope I'd never went down below that because I would have been losing some of the match. Then I know when I started the job I'm at today, I think I started initially at 10. I've been as high as 17. And just to share where I'm at today is, my wife's at 30% and I'm actually at 15. So we've been aggressively saving again now that we're in our 50s. So, and more than anything, the thing I wish I had done was not saving more than the company match. So understand that if your company gives you up to 5%, that doesn't mean that you can't do 6%, 7%, or even higher. So next regret is not taking advantage of the company match. And I do know somebody that was working for my current organization that didn't contribute, right? And they were giving up 50%, 100% returns. So you're leaving free money on the table. Let's do again another quick little example here. Again, this is the example of myself. Now, again, imagine instead of me putting this money in my 401k, let me put this back down to 2%, because this individual that I know, they were not saving it in the 401k. They were taking the money, obviously they were paying taxes on it then, and investing it someplace else, either in their brokerage account or something like that. But they weren't taking the free money. So if I was saving 6%, again, using that example, this is again how much I would have after 43 years of working, $820,000 by getting the free money from my organization. So they gave me 50% up to 6%. Other companies can do obviously much better than that. My current organization gives me about 50% up to 8%. So not going to do that. Again, I'm using my original company's perspectives. But again, with no match, I would have 819,000. With a match, I was, projecting out, again, an 8% return, a little over $1.2 million, $400,000 of increase from my employer putting in 70,000, and I was only putting in 141. So the difference of $400,000 by getting free money is well worth it. So make sure that you get your company's match if they offer you one. Investing too conservatively. So I think some people are more afraid of losing money than they are in actually making money, because they're putting in $100, $200, $500 a month or whatever the number is. And the last thing they want to do is actually lose money. They feel like, hey, I'm saving, I don't want to lose it. And you got to understand, if you're investing it in the market goes up some years. I mean, this past year, I think it was 16, 17%. The year before that, I think it was up to 20%. But there are years like 2022 where you're down 20 something percent. So if you have $10,000 and you lose 20%, all of a sudden you're down $2,000. That's a lot of money, especially if you put all the money in there. So you don't want to lose that. Let's again go back to Dinkytown and actually use an example. I'm going to up this up to 10%. I'll put it back to 6%. And I will include the match in this case. But again, I don't feel like I was overly aggressive in most of my savings, and that's why I put an 8% here. If somebody was making aggressive and actually making it right, you can have over $2 million, right? But again, I'm using something much more somewhat conservative. And again, here over the 43 years, I would have a little more than 1.2 million. But if I had invested this stuff not in maybe stocks, maybe if I wanted to put most of my money into bonds or cash savings, afraid that the market would drop for most of these 43 years. And instead of making an 8% return, let's say it was a little bit more conservative. I'm not going to go down to the 3%, or 4%. Let's put it at 5%, right? So just losing 3% per year annually over the 43 years. Instead of having 1.2 million, I have 582,000. Over half my money just because of 3% over the long term. So not investing, investing too conservatively can dramatically impact your retirement savings. Now, the flip coin, right? I just said you don't want to invest too conservatively, but at the same time, you don't want to invest too aggressively, right? You can be chasing the moon, putting in thousands of dollars, and actually having it all go down to zero at the same time. I use my example of Navex, right? So a friend of mine thought this medical company was going to take off. They were doing a lot of research into different drug formulas, and they were potentially about ready to get approval for this drug. I bought in at $40 a share. Again, I didn't take my life savings. I took $1,000. I thought it was well worth what I had. I had money invested in something else probably, or I just moved $1,000 in and bought a certain number of shares with it, with the potential for it to grow up, but to go up. One day, all of a sudden, when I was logging into the account, I saw that it was dropped down to about $8. My friend got out earlier in the day. I lost it pretty much, 2/3 of my money or more than that. Trying to chase a return, to be honest, that I didn't understand and probably shouldn't have been investing in the first place. I will say I just left my money in there, right? Again, I thought maybe it would go up. COVID came around and the stock took off, right? Because Navex is one that was investing in the vaccine research at the time. A lot of those companies really took off. But like anything, the COVID cycle also came down, kind of like the Zoom stock as well. I did have some money in that. It went up and then it came back down. And instead of selling, right, you always think that, oh, it'll keep going. It currently trades at a little over $9 a share. I think I got out again when it was around that $8 or $10 a share at one point. And again, so, I'm not saying don't invest too conservatively, but, always shooting for very high risk stocks can be just as bad. Not understanding taxes. So this is something I probably have very limited knowledge on, especially starting out. So, now that I'm in my 50s, I do understand a little bit around that, especially around tax rates being progressive. Like, I thought everybody got taxed probably at the same rate. Didn't understand RAWs. Technically, when I was saving initially, there was no such thing as RAWs, right? But understanding there are different tax vehicles and putting your money into each one and having a purpose for each one is very important. Especially when it comes to Roth, I would say if you always think that you're going to be in that 10 or 12% tax bracket range, then again, this is not tax advice. This is just my own experiences. I probably wouldn't invest a lot of money and pay the tax now, primarily because when you take the money out, you're still in the same tax brackets. It probably wouldn't matter that much. But if your salary potential has the opportunity to go a lot higher, then you're going to go into the 22, maybe the 24, the 28%, I think it is, or 32, much higher tax brackets. You probably want to pay the tax brackets when you're younger, and pay it at the 10 or the 12%, let the money grow, and then actually, when you're making those higher salaries, then do pre-tax, right? So understand a lot of those things probably would be very helpful. Get the education that you think you deserve on that. again, and the part that is very important there is if you do build up a lot of money in your 401k, or especially the pre-tax, you're going to be required to take it out potentially because of RMDs. And then there is a widow's penalty that I do kind of think about, especially if, again, you have a lot of money in pre-tax. So when you're pulling money out of your pre-tax, if there's two of you, you're at a combined tax rate. So again, I don't have the tax formulas right in front of me, but you might have to have $200,000 before you're hitting that 24 or 28%. With the widow's penalty, that's if one of you passes away. You're still required to take out just as much money, but now you're getting taxed at a single rate, and so the tax hit could be a lot higher. Underestimating healthcare costs. So again, got this from ChatGPT. This is an area that more than anything, I would say, get your education, right? I'm not an expert in this. I'm nervous about the healthcare costs just from some slight experiences. I know walking into some of these life skills places, it can cost you, $200, $300, $400,000 just to walk in the door. And not only then that, you're going to pay another $3, $4, $5, $6, $7, $10,000 a month in addition to that in premiums. So understanding the healthcare, there is some insurance programs that you could look at that might cover some of those costs. There's HSAs these days that might take some of that money, and that can come out pre-tax as well. So, get the education around that, and underestimating this is going higher and higher on my personal radar, especially as you age. Carrying too much debt into retirement, right? Mortgages, credit cards, loans, that could be car loans, they can drain your fixed retirement income. And the thing that I would say here is, and I put under my thoughts, the biggest risk that I personally see is maybe the sequence of returns, right? So if you have a large mortgage payment that comes out, credit card bills, car payments, right? Things that you can't defer, right? So when the market drops, and, in life, if you don't have these things, you can cut back, right? You can not take that big vacation, right? You can defer maybe some home improvement work, right? Until the market comes back up. You don't lose those sequence of return risks. But if you had large mortgages coming out, large car loans, that would draw down your money after the account has been, gone down because of a market drop, And again, I'm using an example of maybe, let's say the market's dropped in half. You don't want to take that huge risk, especially early on in your retirement. So I think that is, obviously, it's one of the main regrets that people have. Not learning enough about investing, right? And so this is probably something that most people ignore and don't even know about up until they start thinking about retirement. And, some people might never kind of look at that, right? Understanding how retirement accounts works. Most people might not even know that there are different kinds. There's Roth, there's pre-tax, right? There's brokerage accounts. All these things can kind of play together in your retirement plan. Building that diversified portfolio, not having all your money, let's say in like Apple or Google stock, these tech stocks, they could take a hit at some point, maybe larger than others. More than, again, my own wishes is, number one is Roth accounts. I don't have the exact number, but I probably have 98% of my money in pre-tax. I really wish I had funded, especially early on if I could, money into Roth so that I would be able to take that out tax-free from the growth. And then really around the savings rate when I was 22. Again, let's go back to the Dinky Town, and I'm going to take out the match just as an example. Well, because it probably doesn't matter. I'm going to put this back up to 8%. So again, this is the example that I like to use, that I was taking 6% out for my retirement plan because that's what the match went up to, and this is the salary. But again, starting out at 22, I really think that you should be starting at 10%. Look at the difference there. Almost, a little over 1.3. Let me go back to the 6%. 800,000 to a little over 1.3. That's close to a four to $500,000 difference just because of a 4% change in your savings. And again, at that time, it probably would have been maybe an extra, I think I calculated it out at one point. It's another $20 a week that I could have been saving, and I'd have an extra, $500,000. So understand that you can go above your company's match, and understanding that a rate really could do a big difference. Again, maybe if I had even done a 15%, maybe now at my age I could go back down to a 6% or something like that, because so much money was already saved. And the last thing that I think most people is not having a clear retirement plan, right? They don't understand what the lifestyle is going to be. They don't estimate how much they need. Saving with I like what it says there. Without a plan, it's easy to undersave without realizing it. At the same time, again, this is a regret that most people have. I had no plan for the most part. I was doing 6% for the most of it. I moved it up to 10, as I said, and maybe up to 12% at one point. But I really didn't have a savings plan. I was saving, but I didn't have a plan, right? I didn't know about the 4% rule, which is you can pull out about 4% every single year over 30 years, index for inflation, and you shouldn't run out. The savings by age rule, right? So at the age of 30, I should have had 1 times my salary saved. I don't know if I had that, So there's all these different rules that I wish I'd known. Again, do I think that while this is a clear, having a plan, I would have had definitely much more money in Roth. I probably would have increased my savings rate. So I wish I had a plan. But again, I feel like I'm in a very good spot. I didn't have a plan, but there are aspects of things I wish I had done better. So again, if you can come up with a plan, I think you will be in a much better place than I am. Now, hopefully you found those 10 things differently, those 10 things regrets. I think most of them you didn't have. If you found this interesting, I'm going to say, hit that like, and again, more than anything, subscribe. Again, these are 10 different retirement regrets that most people have. Again, with my comments in there. Tell me, which one of these, out of these 10, is the biggest regret that you had, and maybe why. So, thank you, and see you in the next one.